The cries of the Andromedan infant echoed through the makeshift triage bay, a high-pitched wail that cut through the din of battle like a plasma torch. Nothing the medics tried could soothe it. The child's distress was absolute, a raw, primal scream against the chaos of the evacuation. Makeshift tents, stained crimson by the light of the alien sky, offered little protection from the sounds of distant explosions and the groans of the wounded. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of blood and the sterile scent of Andromedan antiseptics, a grim cocktail that did little to mask the pervasive smell of fear. Andromedan medics, their multi-jointed limbs moving with frantic efficiency, administered hyposprays and chanted soothing phrases in their complex melodic language, but the infant remained inconsolable. Its tiny, three-fingered hands clenched into fists, its skin flushed a vibrant violet, a clear sign of escalating distress. Greg, a human field medic, stood back near the edge of the triage area, observing the scene with a jaded eye. He tightened the straps of his medkit, pulling his mask higher over his face, as if to shut out the sound. Another lost cause in a long line of them. He'd seen too much death on too many worlds. Each scream, each gurgled breath, each vacant stare chipped away at the man he once was. The infant's cries triggered a fleeting memory, a small hand reaching for his, a giggle echoing in a sunlit room. He shook the thought away, a familiar ache settling in his chest. Sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. Not anymore. He saw the alien medics failing, their advanced technology seemingly useless against the child's primal need, and sighed inwardly. Against his better judgment, he began to move forward. He approached the cluster of Andromedan medics, his boots crunching on the pulverized rock that served as the triage area's floor. "Let me try," he said, his voice muffled by his mask, the words translated into Andromedan Basic by his implanted translator. The medics, startled by his sudden appearance, protested in a flurry of chirps and clicks. Greg ignored them, wordlessly reaching for the infant. He gently but firmly took the child into his arms. The effect was instantaneous. The infant's wails choked off mid-scream. Its violet skin began to return to a healthier shade of lavender. Its tiny body relaxed, snuggling into the warmth of Greg's embrace. The cries were replaced by soft gurgling, a sound so unexpected it seemed to amplify the surrounding silence. The Andromedan medics were stunned into silence, their multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. They watched, frozen, as the infant, moments ago a screaming ball of distress, now seemed content, nestled against the chest of the human medic. One of the medics, taller and more imposing than the others, approached Greg, her mandibles clicking in a way that suggested both surprise and a hint of suspicion. "What did you do to it?" she demanded, her voice sharp despite the translation smoothing its edges. "How did you silence it?" Greg simply shrugged, shifting the infant slightly in his arms. "I just held it," he replied, his voice low and even. "Sometimes that's all they need, a gentle touch, a calming presence." The medic tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. "This particular infant," she explained, "suffers from a rare genetic anomaly. Its emotional regulation is compromised. It requires physical contact to stabilize. I am Taryn," she continued, introducing herself. "This infant was separated from its parents during a krill raid on the creche. We have been searching for them for hours." Greg frowned, his gaze softening as he looked down at the infant in his arms. "The parents?" he asked. "It is imperative we find them," Taryn replied, her voice permeated with urgency. "The infant requires nourishment from its mother. Soon." Before Greg could respond, a klaxon blared, its shrill cry cutting through the relative quiet of the triage area. Other medics began shouting, their voices rising in panic. "Another krill raid incoming. Evacuation protocols are being shifted to Sector Gamma." Taryn turned back to Greg, her expression pleading. "Please," she said, "come with us. Continue holding the child. We cannot risk it relapsing into that state." Greg hesitated for only a moment, his gaze fixed on the tiny alien face nestled against his chest. The weight in his arms felt right. He looked up at Terran, his eyes hardening with a newfound willpower. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "Let's find its parents." The group moved quickly, a cluster of weary figures navigating the ruined landscape. The air hung thick with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid stench of burnt circuitry. Greg shielded the infant's head, his own senses overwhelmed by the cacophony of cries and the rumble of distant explosions. An ear-splitting roar tore through the air. The ground bucked beneath their feet as an explosion ripped through a nearby med tent, sending a shower of debris raining down. Greg instinctively threw himself over the infant, shielding it from the blast with his body. Jagged chunks of plasteel and twisted metal clattered around them. "Keep moving, now," Terran shouted, her voice strained but firm, directing the others towards the relative safety of a crater. "We need to get to the APC." Her eyes darted nervously towards Greg and the infant, a flicker of worry crossing her face. The infant, startled by the explosion, began to wail again, its small body trembling. Greg, still kneeling, pulled the child closer, humming a soft, wordless tune. He gently rocked back and forth, the rhythmic motion seeming to have a calming effect. The cries softened, becoming whimpers, then fading into quiet snuffles. As they pressed on, Terran turned to Greg, her expression a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. "Thank you, Greg, but I do not understand. Why only you can calm the child? Our medics have tried everything." Greg shrugged, his brow furrowed. "I don't know exactly. Maybe it's just human touch is different. Or maybe it's just some kind of paternal instinct kicking in. I just know it needed something, and I tried to give it." They reached the designated transport vehicle, a heavily armored personnel carrier, its hull scarred with scorch marks. The APC was already packed to capacity with evacuees, a grim tableau of the wounded and the terrified. Groans of pain mingled with silent tears, creating an atmosphere of suffocating despair. Greg squeezed his way inside, finding a relatively quiet corner near the back. He settled against a wall, cradling the infant in his arms. He noticed the child's skin was slightly pale, a subtle indication of continued distress despite the relative quiet. Terran climbed in after him, her expression grave. "This APC is heading to a secondary evacuation point. It's located a few kilometers away near an abandoned Andromedan research facility." Greg frowned. "A research facility? What kind of research?" "Xenobiological studies, mostly," Terran replied, her voice low. "It was abandoned months ago, after the Krill started focusing their attacks in this sector." Another Andromedan medic, her face etched with exhaustion, pushed her way through the crowd. "Terran, the Krill attacks are increasing in frequency. The scanners are picking up more and more scout ships. This evacuation route is becoming too dangerous." Suddenly, a series of deafening impacts shook the APC. Energy blasts slammed into the vehicle's armored hull, causing it to lurch violently. Sparks flew from damaged consoles and screams erupted from the terrified evacuees. Greg gripped the infant tightly, bracing himself against the jolting motion. The APC swerved erratically, the driver struggling to maintain control. The infant, overwhelmed by the renewed chaos, began to cry again, its high-pitched wail piercing through the din. Terran, her face grim, barked an order to the driver. "Stop the APC, we need to find the infant's parents. They were last seen closer to the triage center." "Are you crazy?" the driver shouted back, his voice tinged with fear. "We can't go back there, it's suicide." "We have no choice," Terran retorted, her voice unwavering. "We can't leave them behind." She turned to Greg, her eyes filled with persistence. Greg, already anticipating her next words, nodded. "How do we find them?" "Andromedans have a unique scent, a biological marker," Terran explained. "I can track it even through the smoke and debris." Greg tightened his hold on the infant. "Then let's go. I'm not leaving its side with these attacks." Terran nodded, her lips set in a firm line. Together, they pushed their way out of the APC and ventured back towards the triage area, now a smoldering ruin under a smoke-filled sky. The cries of the wounded and the distant drone of Krill's ships were their only guides. Terran and Greg moved cautiously through the ruined triage area, the air thick with smoke that stung Greg's eyes and the metallic stench of burning metal that made him gag. The cries of the wounded were fewer now, replaced by an unsettling silence punctuated by the crackle of distant fires. Terran adjusted a device strapped to her forearm, a series of shimmering crystals embedded in a polished andromedon alloy. Andromedon pheromone tracker, crude but functional. Their scent is faint, masked by the Krill's musk, but it's there. She moved forward, the device emitting a soft, pulsating glow as she followed the faint trail. A high-pitched whine cut through the air. A Krill drone, its multifaceted eyes glowing crimson, emerged from the shadows of a collapsed transport vehicle. It unleashed a barrage of energy blasts, searing the ground where Terran and Greg had been standing moments before. They dove for cover behind the wrecked transport, the heat of the blasts radiating against their backs. Greg leveled his pulse rifle, the familiar weight grounding him. He squeezed the trigger, a concentrated burst of energy slamming into the drone. The drone sputtered, its movements erratic, before crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. "That'll attract attention," Greg muttered, already scanning the surrounding ruins. They continued to follow the scent trail, which led them towards the monolithic silhouette of what remained of the abandoned Andromedon research facility. Its durasteel walls were scarred with blast marks, and gaping holes revealed twisted frameworks within. "The parents might be seeking shelter there," Terran said, her voice tight with concern. "Or perhaps they were trying to retrieve something. That facility was important." Rounding a corner, they stumbled upon a group of injured Andromedon soldiers, pinned down behind a barricade of overturned crates, taking heavy fire from unseen Krill. Plasma bolts sizzled past, chewing chunks out of the crates. Without hesitation, Greg rushed forward, his medical bag bumping against his side. He dropped to his knees beside a soldier whose leg was mangled, quickly assessing the damage. "Tourniquet, now," he barked, his voice all business. While Greg worked feverishly, Terran coordinated a defensive strategy with the remaining soldiers, her prosthetic limb whirring softly as she moved. They managed to repel the Krill attack, but the victory felt hollow. "The facility is heavily guarded," one of the soldiers wheezed, clutching his side. "They want something inside, something important." As they approached the facility, the signs of a recent battle were undeniable. Scorched earth, destroyed equipment, and the bodies of Andromedons and Krill alike, locked in their final embrace. The air thrummed with a residual energy, a silent testament to the ferocity of the fighting. Terran's pheromone tracker pulsed faster, the light growing more intense. "The signal is stronger here." They're inside, but close to the Krill. Suddenly, the ground erupted in front of them. A larger Krill patrol, armed with advanced weaponry that Greg had never seen before, ambushed them. Energy shields flickered and died under the onslaught, and the air filled with the deafening roar of plasma fire. Chaos erupted. Greg and Terran were separated in the melee, each desperately trying to evade the Krill while shielding the infant from harm. Greg found himself forced inside a ruined lab, the door slamming shut behind him as a Krill warrior, easily 8 feet tall, its chitinous armor gleaming menacingly, lumbered toward him, its weapon trained on his chest. The infant, nestled securely in Greg's arms, emitted a sudden, high-pitched sound, a piercing shriek that seemed to momentarily stun the Krill warrior, its multifaceted eyes flickering in confusion. Meanwhile, Terran, fighting her way through the labyrinthine corridors of the facility, discovered a hidden research lab, its entrance concealed behind a false wall. Inside, strange alien artifacts hummed with an otherworldly energy. Her mind raced with the possibilities of what they could be, but the cries of the infant and the memory of the parents drove her on. She activated her comms, sending a desperate distress signal to the remaining evac forces. "This is Terran. I need immediate assistance. I've located something significant." Greg, seizing the opportunity created by the infant's cry, managed to scramble out of the lab, the Krill warrior momentarily disoriented. He sprinted back towards the facility's main entrance, reconnecting with Terran near the shattered remains of what was once a security checkpoint. Together they pushed forward, following the strongest concentration of the Andromedan scent, their hearts pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. They reached the location, a small, secluded chamber, only to find trails of blood smeared across the floor, leading deeper into the facility. But there was no sign of the parents. Greg knelt, his fingers tracing the crimson streaks across the cold, metallic floor. The blood, still tacky to the touch, led away from the triage zone, a macabre breadcrumb trail. He pulled a scanner from his belt, its beam painting the stains in false colors. Definitely Andromedan, two distinct profiles. He paused, the scanner whirring. Severe trauma, significant blood loss. They wouldn't have gotten far on their own. Terran, her face grim, accessed a nearby console. Her fingers danced across the holographic keyboard with practiced ease. Facility security logs. Let's see where our missing parents went. A moment later, grainy footage flickered on the screen. Two Andromedans, one limping heavily, being forced down a corridor by a squad of Krill. The Krill's insectal faces were impassive, their mandibles clicking softly. They were captured. Krill patrol heading deeper into the complex towards the restricted zone. Before either could speak, a klaxon blared, bathing the corridor in pulsating red light. A synthesized voice boomed, breach detected. Sector Gamma 9 compromised. Krill incursion imminent. Greg swore. They're pushing harder than before. We need to move now. Those parents aren't going to rescue themselves. He glanced at Terran. You good to go? Terran nodded, her prosthetic limb whirring softly as she adjusted her balance. Let's hope they're still alive by the time we catch up. They moved swiftly, following the same route the Krill patrol had taken. The sterile corridors gave way to a section of the facility that felt different. The walls were constructed from an unfamiliar alloy, shimmering with an iridescent sheen. Intricate glyphs adorned the surfaces, pulsing with a faint, internal light. Advanced Andromedan technology, unlike anything Greg had ever seen. Terran ran a hand along one of the walls, her expression thoughtful. This part of the facility was dedicated to experimental weaponry research. The Andromedans were always secretive about what they were working on. I did not have clearance to enter this zone when I was stationed here. They rounded a corner and stopped short. A group of Krill were clustered around a reinforced door, their chitinous bodies twitching with anticipation. A beam of concentrated energy, emitted from a weapon held by one of the Krill, was slowly melting the door's heavy plating, sending showers of sparks into the air. The Krill seemed oblivious to Greg and Terran's presence, completely focused on their task. They're not even interested in a firefight, Greg muttered, raising his pulse rifle. They must really want whatever's behind that door. He and Terran opened fire, the sharp reports of their weapons echoing through the corridor. The Krill closest to them staggered, their exoskeletons cracking under the barrage, but the others continued their assault on the door, seemingly unfazed. Greg reloaded, frustration building. He noticed a series of symbols etched into the door's surface, glowing faintly beneath the energy weapon's glare. He squinted, trying to make them out. A jolt of recognition shot through him. Wait a minute, Terran, those symbols. They're the same as the ones on your prosthetic limb. Before Terran could respond, the door buckled inward with a groan of tortured metal. The Krill surged forward, disappearing into the vault beyond, still ignoring Greg and Terran. What the hell is so important in there? Greg asked, exchanging a look with Terran. They cautiously approached the vault entrance, weapons raised. The vault was empty, a vast circular chamber devoid of any equipment or personnel. except for a single raised pedestal in the center of the room. On the pedestal rested a small rectangular device pulsing with a soft blue light, an Andromedan data storage device. The krill were already retreating, clutching the device tightly in their mandibles. Greg lunged forward, intent on intercepting them. "We can't let them get away with that." Taryn grabbed his arm, stopping him in his tracks. "No, Greg, wait, I sense a trap." Her eyes darted around the room, her expression tense. He hesitated, torn between his desire to act and his trust in Taryn's instincts. He relented. All right, we fall back, but we need to know where they are going." They retreated from the vault, keeping a safe distance from the krill. They followed them through the complex, their movements swift and silent. Taryn focused, her brow furrowed in concentration. "I'm trying to tap into their communication channels. It's difficult, their tech is not like anything I have seen, but..." She paused. "I've got something. They're under strict orders to retrieve that device. It's vital, more important than anything else." The krill led them to a hidden exit, concealed behind a section of collapsed wall. A small transport ship, sleek and black, waited just outside. The krill scrambled aboard, the ship's engines whining to life. Greg watched helplessly as the transport ship rose into the sky, disappearing into the clouds. "Damn it, they're getting away." Taryn stared after the ship, her expression grim. "It's heading towards a larger krill vessel in orbit. We're stuck here." She turned back to the reinforced door, her fingers tracing the glowing symbols. "I can translate these now. They tell a story, a warning, and an answer." Her voice was barely a whisper. "The parents, they might still be alive, held captive on that krill ship." Static. Greg slapped the side of his helmet, the gesture echoing uselessly in the confined space. "Taryn, comms are dead. Can't raise the fleet." Taryn, her silver eyes narrowed in concentration, tapped the control panel of her prosthetic arm. "Mine are also offline. The krill must have deployed a jamming field before they retreated. Clever. It is localized, however. If we can reach higher ground, we might be able to break through." She gestured towards a long, shadowed corridor. "This facility. It appears to be abandoned, but it might contain a solution. Perhaps a working comm system, or even transport." The air hung thick with the metallic tang of ozone and the stale scent of disuse. They moved cautiously, their boots echoing on the polished durasteel floor. Flickering emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows that played tricks on the eye. After several minutes of silent searching, Taryn stopped before a reinforced door, its surface etched with Andromedan script. "This chamber. According to the schematics, it was a high-security laboratory. Let us hope the krill overlooked it." The door hissed open, revealing a starkly different scene. While the rest of the facility was decaying, this lab was pristine. Gleaming chrome instruments lined the walls, humming with latent power. In the center of the room, a complex array of consoles blinked with cryptic symbols. Greg ran a hand over one of the consoles. "This is advanced, even by our standards. You think you can work with this stuff?" "I am a xenolinguist and a systems engineer, Greg. Deciphering ancient technology is within my skill set." Taryn moved to a central console, her fingers flying across the controls. "Aha, a long-range transmitter. Offline, but I believe I can repair it. However, it requires a power cell, a rare isotope not commonly used." "Where do we find one of those?" Greg asked, already bracing himself for another trek into the unknown. Taryn consulted the schematic displayed on the console. Deeper within the facility. A secure storage vault, according to this. Heavily shielded. The corridors beyond the lab were a labyrinth of twists and turns. Deactivated security cameras stared blankly from the ceilings, their lenses clouded with dust. They passed through rooms filled with strange, alien equipment, devices that hinted at the advanced research that had once been conducted here. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the hiss of escaping air from damaged conduits. Suddenly, a beam of crimson light sliced through the darkness, narrowly missing Greg. He swore, diving for cover behind a stack of crates. What was that? An experimental weapon, Taryn said grimly, her prosthetic arm whirring as she analyzed the energy signature. A phase shift emitter, highly unstable. You triggered a proximity sensor. Before Greg could react, another beam lanced out, striking him squarely in the chest. He gasped, a searing pain ripping through his body. Then darkness. He awoke moments later, sprawled on the floor. Taryn was kneeling beside him, her expression etched with concern. "Greg, are you all right?" He sat up, his head swimming. Yeah, I think so." What happened? He felt different, sharper. The stale air in the facility suddenly assaulted his nostrils with 1,000 different scents. He could hear the faint hum of machinery from deep within the walls. "The emitter," Taryn said, her voice tight. "It bathed you in an unknown energy field. I do not know its effects." Greg blinked, trying to focus. He felt stronger. He clenched his fist, and a tremor ran through his arm. But then a wave of dizziness washed over him, and the world swam before his eyes. Blackness threatened to engulf him again. "Greg," Taryn's voice cut through the fog, "stay with me." He shook his head, fighting to regain control. I'm okay, just a little dizzy." Taryn scanned him with her prosthetic sensors. Her silver eyes widened. "The energy field. It is rewriting your DNA, Greg. It is altering your cellular structure. I do not know the long-term consequences, but I can tell you this is dangerous, perhaps even fatal." "Great," Greg muttered. "Just what I needed." He pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the lingering dizziness. "We still need that power cell. Let's go." They continued deeper into the facility, their pace quickened by a sense of urgency. Finally, they reached a massive vault door, its surface scarred with scorch marks. A keypad glowed red beside it. "This is it," Taryn said. "The power cell must be inside." As they approached the door, a low hum filled the air. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a deactivated security drone. Its metallic chassis was dented and blackened, its weapon systems offline. But as they drew closer, a flicker of energy sparked within its optical sensors. With a jolt, the drone reactivated, its weapons whirring to life. "Intruders detected," a synthesized voice rasped. "Engaging security protocols." The drone opened fire, a barrage of plasma bolts searing the air. Greg and Taryn dove for cover, the air crackling with energy. Greg felt a surge of adrenaline, his senses heightened. He could see the drone's movements with unnatural clarity, anticipate its attacks before they happened. He risked a glance, spotting a weak point in the drone's armor, a damaged power coupling on its left side. He took a deep breath, focusing his newfound strength. He charged, weaving between the plasma bolts, his movements faster than he thought possible. He slammed into the drone, his fist connecting with the damaged coupling. A shower of sparks erupted, and the drone shuddered, its weapon system sputtering. It crashed to the floor, its metallic limbs twitching. "Nice work," Taryn said, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and concern. "But be careful, Greg. This is not a game." They retrieved the power cell from the vault, a small, crystalline object that pulsed with a soft blue light. Taryn quickly installed it in the transmitter, her fingers moving with practiced ease. The console flickered to life, displaying a series of complex diagnostics. "Power is restored," she announced. Attempting to establish a connection with the fleet, she activated the transmitter, her voice clear and strong. "Andromedan evacuation fleet, this is Taryn Carr, do you read? We require immediate assistance." A moment of silence hung in the air, broken only by the static crackle of the transmitter. Then a garbled voice responded, distorted and weak. "Taryn, attack. Krill." Breached defenses. The transmission cut out, replaced by a wall of static. Taryn stared at the console, her face pale. "They are under attack," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The Krill, they have breached our defenses." Greg felt a cold dread creep into his heart. What about the data device? The one they stole? Taryn's eyes widened. "That is it, the device. It contains information about a critical weakness in our defenses, if the Krill exploit it. Then everything is lost," Greg finished grimly. "We have to stop them." Taryn accessed the facility's schematics again, her fingers flying across the console. There is an abandoned Andromedan shuttle bay not far from here. According to this, the Krill are using the shuttle to travel to their orbiting ship. They race through the corridors, their footsteps echoing with a renewed sense of urgency. They found the shuttle bay a vast chamber dominated by a sleek, silver spacecraft. The shuttle was prepped for launch, its engines humming with scarcely controlled power. But the bay doors were sealed and the launch sequence was locked. "We need to get inside," Greg said, his voice tight. "But how do we launch it?" Taryn examined the launch controls. "The system is locked down. It requires a manual override to start." "Where is it?" Greg asked, his enhanced senses straining to pick up any clue. He closed his eyes, focusing on the hum of the shuttle's engines, the whisper of air through the ventilation ducts, the faint electrical currents that coursed through the walls. He could feel the vibrations of the facility, the subtle shifts in pressure, the minute changes in temperature. "There," he said, pointing towards a small access panel on the far side of the bay. "Behind that panel." "The override controls." "But the doors," Taryn said, gesturing towards the massive, sealed bay doors. "We cannot reach the controls in time." Greg stared at the doors, his mind racing. He could feel the power surging through his veins, the altered DNA rewriting his very being. He took a deep breath, bracing himself. "Stand back," he said. "I have an idea." He ran towards the doors, his footsteps pounding on the metal floor. He reached the doors, placing his hands against the cold, unyielding metal. He closed his eyes, focusing all his strength, all his will, into a single, explosive burst of power. With a groan of protesting metal, the doors began to buckle. Cracks spiderwebbed across their surface and the seals shattered, showering them with dust and debris. Slowly, agonizingly, the doors began to open. "Greg, the shuttle," Taryn shouted. "It is starting its launch sequence." He glanced towards the shuttle. The engines were roaring to life, bathing the bay in a blinding light. The launch clamps disengaged, and the shuttle began to slide forward towards the opening doors. They raced towards the shuttle, sprinting across the bay. They reached the boarding ramp just as it began to retract. Greg grabbed Taryn, hauling her onto the ramp. He scrambled after her, barely managing to grab a handhold as the ramp retracted fully. The shuttle lurched forward, accelerating towards the open bay doors. The G-force slammed them against the back wall, their bodies straining against the sudden acceleration. The world outside became a blur of motion as the shuttle blasted out of the facility and into the sky. They managed to strap themselves into the pilot seats just as the shuttle entered orbit. Taryn wrestled with the controls, stabilizing the craft. "We are in orbit," she said, her voice tight, approaching the Krill vessel. As the shuttle neared the Krill warship, Taryn ran a final diagnostic scan. Her silver eyes widened in alarm. "Greg," she said, her voice filled with dread. "There is an anomaly in your DNA, the mutation. It is accelerating, it is becoming unstable. This is not just dangerous, Greg. This could be the end of you." The stolen shuttle shuddered, alarms blaring a discordant symphony of impending doom. Greg wrestled with the controls, his nucleus tightening against the worn metal. Taryn monitored the energy readings, her brow furrowed with concern. "They're gaining on us, Greg. 2 Krill fighters on our tail." Greg's eyes darted around the cockpit, not at the instruments but seemingly through them, as if he could see the enemy ships without visual confirmation. He subtly adjusted the shuttle's trajectory a split second before a volley of plasma fire streaked past, scorching the hull. "Hard left, Taryn. They're anticipating our evasive maneuvers." His voice was calm, almost detached, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. It was as if he could feel the Krill fighters closing in, predict their every move. They slammed into the docking clamps of the Krill vessel, the sudden stop throwing them against their restraints. "Brace yourselves," Greg yelled, releasing the clamps and drawing his sidearm. The airlock hissed open, revealing a squad of Krill soldiers, their chitinous armor gleaming in the harsh light. The firefight was brutal and swift. Greg moved with unnatural speed and precision, his shots finding their marks with deadly accuracy. Taryn, though smaller in stature, fought with a ferocity born of desperation, her prosthetic arm a blur as she wielded her weapon. They pushed through the Krill soldiers, their bodies crumpling to the floor, and advanced deeper into the ship. They found her in a dimly lit cell, strapped to a bioscanner. An Andromedan, her skin pale and clammy, her eyes vacant with pain. Scars crisscrossed her body, testament to the Krill's brutal interrogation methods. Dr. Aris Thorne, Taryn breathed, recognizing the renowned scientist. "We're here to rescue you." Thorne's voice was raspy, barely a whisper. Too late. They know about the shield harmonics. Greg gently unstrapped her from the device. "What shield harmonics? What did you tell them?" "The Krill, they want to disable our fleet's shields, a single frequency, a resonance." Thorne coughed, blood trickling from her lips. Taryn glanced at Greg, her expression a mixture of awe and apprehension. "Greg, you're different, your powers, they're growing stronger." He ignored her, his focus solely on Thorne. "We need to get you out of here. Can you walk?" Thorne nodded weakly, leaning heavily on Greg for support. As they made their way back to the shuttle, Greg's hand brushed against a control panel. A surge of energy coursed through him, a wave of pure, raw power. He instinctively knew how to overload the ship's internal sensors, creating a temporary blind spot. "Taryn, get Thorne to the shuttle. I'll cover our escape." "Greg, no, you can't take them all on." "I have to. They can't be allowed to transmit that data." His eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity. He wasn't just a medic anymore, he was something else, something more. Thorne looked at Greg, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. "They plan to use my knowledge to cripple our defenses. You must stop them." Greg nodded, his eyes hardened with grit. "I will." Taryn reluctantly led Thorne back to the shuttle, her gaze fixed on Greg as he turned to face the oncoming Krill reinforcements. He raised his hands, and a wave of energy erupted from him, throwing the Krill soldiers back against the walls. Taryn piloted the shuttle away from the Krill vessel, plasma fire erupting around them. "Greg, get out of there." She yelled into the comms, but there was no response. Suddenly, the shuttle lurched violently. "We've been hit," Taryn shouted. Sparks flew from the console as the ship shook. "The hyperdrive is offline, we're stranded." Below them, the Krill vessel began to power up its hyperdrive. They were going to transmit the data, and there was nothing Taryn could do to stop them. Then a blinding flash of light engulfed the Krill ship. A wave of energy unlike anything Taryn had ever seen emanated from within, disrupting the ship's systems. The Krill vessel shuddered, its hyperdrive sputtering and failing. "What was that?" Thorne gasped, her eyes wide with disbelief. Taryn knew. It was Greg. He had used his powers to create a diversion, buying them time, but at what cost? On the Krill vessel, Greg collapsed to his knees, his body racked with tremors. His mutation was accelerating, consuming him. Krill soldiers swarmed around him, dragging him away. He was their prisoner now. They would extract the information from his mind, use his newfound abilities against his own kind. The last thing Greg saw before darkness consumed him was the cold, unfeeling gaze of the Krill commander. The extraction would begin soon. The neural tendrils snaked across Greg's scalp, cold and invasive. A low, resonant hum vibrated through his skull, each pulse a hammer blow against his sanity. The Krill were inside his mind, sifting through his memories, cataloging his fears. Pain, raw and electric, coursed through his nervous system, a relentless assault that threatened to overwhelm him. Then a flicker, a memory unbidden and unwelcome surfaced from the depths of his subconscious. A sunny afternoon, a park, a child's laughter, his child, Sarah, her small hand, warm and trusting, clasped in his. The memory was so vivid, so real, he could almost smell the freshly cut grass, feel the gentle breeze on his skin. A wave of grief, sharp and agonizing, crashed over him, threatening to drown him in its depths. The krill seized on the memory, amplifying his pain, twisting his love into a weapon. He felt them probing the raw edges of his loss, relishing his suffering. They burrowed deeper, seeking the source of his empathy, the wellspring of his compassion. They found it a deep-seated desire to protect, to heal, to nurture. A desire that had been shattered years ago but never truly extinguished. His body convulsed, muscles spasming against the restraints. He could feel his mutation accelerating, his cells vibrating at a higher frequency. The mental and physical strain was immense, pushing him to the brink of collapse. Meanwhile, light years away, inside the crippled shuttle, Terran ran a diagnostic scan on the life support systems. The results were grim. Oxygen levels are dropping, Thorn. We've got maybe 4 hours of breathable AI, Doctor. Doctor. Thorn, her face illuminated by the flickering emergency lights, worked feverishly at a damaged console. I've managed to reroute power to the environmental controls, but it's only a temporary fix. She paused, wiping sweat from her brow. There is one possibility. I managed to salvage a partial schematic of a distress beacon before we evacuated. If we can find the necessary parts, we might be able to send a signal. Terran's gaze drifted to the viewport. The blackness of space stretched out before them, cold and unforgiving. Where are we going to find parts out here, Doc? We're adrift in the middle of nowhere. Thorn pointed to a sensor reading. There's a derelict krill probe drifting about 5 kilometers from here. It's likely scavenged, but it might contain some usable components. A krill probe. Terran's hand instinctively went to the pulse rifle strapped to his back. That sounds like a trap. It's a risk we have to take, Thorn said, her voice firm. It's our only chance. Minutes later, clad in environmental suits, Terran and Thorn floated through the void towards the derelict probe. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hiss of their oxygen regulators. The probe loomed before them, a dark and ominous shape against the backdrop of distant stars. As they approached, automated defense systems flickered to life. Laser turrets swiveled, targeting them with deadly precision. I thought you said it was scavenged. Terran shouted over the comms, dodging a volley of energy blasts. I said it was likely scavenged. Thorn replied, returning fire with her pulse pistol. Just disable the turrets and let's get this over with. They managed to disable the defenses, but not without sustaining damage to their suits. With a sigh of relief, they entered the probe. The interior was a maze of twisted metal and sparking wires. After a frantic search, they located the damaged distress beacon components. Back in the krill interrogation chamber, Greg felt a surge of power unlike anything he had ever experienced. The krill were pushing harder, attempting to extract information about Andromedan shield technology. He resisted, but their mental assault was relentless. Unconsciously, he projected his fear, his desperation, his longing for escape. The wave of raw emotion slammed into the krill's neural network, disrupting their delicate mental architecture. Alarms blared. Lights flickered. The interrogators recoiled, their faces contorted in pain. The krill guards, momentarily incapacitated, stumbled back. Greg, seizing the opportunity, strained against his restraints. The metal bonds groaned, then snapped. On the shut doctor, Terran, using Dr. Thorn's expertise, managed to jury-rig the distress beacon. Almost, there. Sparks flew as he connected the final wire. The beacon flickered to life, emitting a weak, intermittent signal. It's not much, but it's the best we can do. As Terran activated the beacon, a faint energy signature flickered on the shuttle's sensors. Thorn, I'm picking up something. Faint energy signatures, emanating from a nearby asteroid field. In the interrogation chamber, Greg, now free from his restraints, staggered to his feet. His head throbbed, his vision blurred. But then, a picture formed in his Doctor. A picture of Terran and Doctor. Thorn floating in space, their shuttle crippled, their lives hanging by a thread. He saw their location, pinpointed among the asteroids. A surge of adrenaline coursed through him. He knew what he had to do. The krill ship swam around him, a nauseating ballet of shifting bulkheads and corridors that twisted at impossible angles. Greg fought the rising tide of disorientation, his vision blurring at the edges, each pulse of the ship's alien heart sending a jolt of pain through his skull. The mutation was accelerating, amplifying every sensation until it threatened to overwhelm him. He focused on the image in his mind, the faint glimmer of the damaged shuttle, a beacon in this organic, metallic labyrinth. The architecture defied logic. Corridors that seemed solid dissolved into shimmering illusions, gravity wells shifted without warning, and the very air hummed with a frequency that scraped against his teeth. It was as if the krill had designed their ships to be incomprehensible to outsiders, a swirling vortex of deception and misdirection. He stumbled, catching himself against a pulsating wall that felt slick and warm beneath his touch. Each step was agony. The enhanced senses that had once been a gift now felt like a curse, a constant barrage of information that his brain struggled to process. His vision swam, the already dim corridors flickering with phantom lights and distorted shadows. He tasted metal in his mouth, a metallic tang that seemed to emanate from the very structure of the ship. A klaxon blared, a high-pitched shriek that resonated deep within his bones. Red lights pulsed, bathing the corridors in a crimson glow. The ship was locking down. Section by section, access points slammed shut, sealing off escape routes and tightening the net around him. He could feel them now, the krill sensors, invisible tendrils of energy probing his flesh, mapping his movements. It was like being dissected alive, every nerve ending exposed and raw. He pressed on, ignoring the pain driven by the urgency of his vision. A cold, mechanical voice echoed through the corridors, unintelligible but undeniably menacing. He knew what it meant: hunter-killer drones. They were coming for him. In a darkened chamber, a krill commander reviewed Greg's file, the alien script scrolling across a holographic display. The commander paused, focusing on the notes detailing Greg's empathic abilities. A flicker of something akin to interest crossed its multifaceted eyes. This mutated human was more than just an escapee. He was a potential asset, or a significant threat. He found them huddled near the damaged shuttle, Terran's face grim, Thorne's expression a mask of cautious skepticism. They didn't look relieved to see him, more wary. "Lewis, what in the hell are you doing here?" Terran demanded, his hand instinctively moving towards his sidearm. "I thought you were dead." Thorne stepped forward, her gaze assessing. "He's changed. Something's different." "We need to get that beacon working," Terran said, ignoring Greg's presence, clearly prioritizing their original plan. "Thorne says the signal's weak, barely reaching past the asteroid field." Greg ignored the hostility, his enhanced senses screaming a warning. "There's no time, they're coming. Hunter-killer drones specialized for people like me." He winced, the pain intensifying. "This whole area is going to be sealed off." Terran scoffed. "Drones? We can handle a few drones. We need to focus on the beacon." Greg shook his head, struggling to articulate the urgency he felt. "It's a trap. The energy signatures from the asteroid field. They're not natural. It's a hidden krill outpost, masking their true signal. They're studying captured life forms, experimenting, creating weapons." Thorne's eyes widened slightly. "Bioweapons, that would explain the inconsistencies in the sensor readings from the field. And they're jamming our signal," Terran realized, cursing under his breath. "That's why it's so weak." A barrage of laser fire erupted from the end of the corridor, the air crackling with energy. 3 sleek black drones filled with weapons rounded the corner, their targeting sensors locking onto Greg, Terran, and Thorne. "Drones!" Greg yelled, shoving Terran and Thorne behind a stack of damaged cargo containers. "Take cover." Using his amplified senses, Greg anticipated the drones' movements, calling out warnings just moments before they fired. "Left. Down now." His voice was strained, each burst of adrenaline exacerbating the pain of the mutation. Terran and Thorne returned fire, their pulse rifles spitting bolts of energy that slammed into the drones, sending sparks flying. But the drones were too fast, too agile. They weaved through the laser fire, their own weapons tearing chunks out of the cargo containers. Suddenly, an unseen force erupted from Greg. It wasn't a conscious act, more like a release of pent-up energy. A wave of empathic force washed over the drones, disrupting their circuits, scrambling their programming. The drones began to twitch erratically, their movements becoming jerky and unpredictable. One slammed into a wall, its weapons firing wildly. Another spun in circles, its sensors overloaded. Despite the momentary advantage, the drones were too numerous, too resilient. One by one, Terran and Thorn were hit, collapsing to the ground, incapacitated. Greg, weakened by the mutation and the unexpected manifestation of his powers, could only watch as the remaining drones converged on him. A shimmering energy field enveloped him, constricting his movements, searing his skin. He screamed, the pain unbearable. Darkness closed in as the drones lifted him into the air, his body rigid and unresponsive. Terran and Thorn were dragged along beside him, unconscious. They were being taken somewhere, deeper into the heart of the Krill ship, towards the hidden research outpost within the asteroid field. In a sterile observation room, the Krill commander watched as Greg was placed in a containment cell, its multifaceted eyes gleaming with cold, calculating interest. The commander anticipated the potential scientific value of his amplified empathic abilities. The Krill had found a new test subject, a new tool in their arsenal. The cold seeped into Greg's bones, a metallic chill that resonated with the sterile tang of the air. He blinked, vision swimming as his eyes adjusted to the dim, bluish light of the holding cell. The walls were smooth, seamless metal, humming with a low, constant vibration. Strange, unidentifiable equipment lined one wall, blinking with an alien purpose he couldn't fathom. A sharp, clicking sound echoed through the cell, followed by the hiss of a pneumatic door. Two Krill scientists, their chitinous bodies encased in sterile suits, entered. Their multifaceted eyes, devoid of warmth, focused on him with detached curiosity. One held a device that emitted a high-pitched whine, while the other brandished a series of probes. The whine intensified as the first Krill approached, its mandibles clicking in what Greg could only interpret as clinical interest. The probe pressed against his temple, sending a jolt of cold energy through his skull. Images flashed behind his eyes, disjointed, chaotic scenes of suffering and despair. Muffled sounds of struggle, distorted voice, alien intonation, distress beacon, location, survivors. Another voice defiant, you'll get nothing. The probes continued their assault, each one a violation, a probing of his very essence. He felt a growing pressure in his mind, a sense of being dissected and analyzed. The Krill were fascinated by something within him, something they called a mutation, a potential they sought to unlock. The examination intensified. Flashing strobes assaulted his vision, a cacophony of jarring sounds hammered at his ears, and emotionally charged images flooded his mind, scenes of loss, grief, and unimaginable pain. He felt the emotions of others, amplified and distorted, crashing against his own sanity. A wave of despair washed over him, threatening to drown him. He wasn't just feeling his own pain, he was feeling the pain of countless others imprisoned within this outpost. Subject exhibits heightened empathic response. One of the Krill scientists clicked, its voice devoid of emotion. Potential for emotional manipulation is significant. The tests grew more invasive, more brutal. They were trying to weaponize his empathy, to twist his ability to feel into a tool of control. He felt them probing his mind, searching for the key to unlock his power, to bend it to their will. In the adjacent cell, Thorn stared intently at the shimmering field that held him captive. He ran his gaze along each pulse of light. His cybernetic eye whirred softly as it analyzed the energy fluctuations, searching for a weakness, a flaw in the design. It was there, he could feel it, but he needed more time, more data. Greg fought back, drawing on every ounce of willpower he possessed. He focused on the faces of those he had sworn to protect, on the memory of Daphne's unwavering purpose, on the innocent face of the Andromedan infant. He would not let them break him. He would not let them use him. A faint flicker of hope, a spark of defiance, reached him through the empathic link. Terran. He was still alive, still fighting. Greg focused his mind, sending back a surge of drive, a silent promise of resistance. The Krill commander, a towering figure with razor-sharp mandibles, observed the tests from a raised platform. Subject's resistance is problematic, it hissed, its voice imbued with impatience. Increase the intensity. We must break him. Terran, his hands shackled to the wall, subtly manipulated the energy conduits within his cell. Minute fluctuations, barely perceptible, rippled through the power grid. It was a gamble, a desperate attempt to buy them some time. A vision slammed into Greg's mind, a grotesque laboratory filled with bubbling vats and twisted forms. He saw the Krill extracting genetic material from their prisoners, splicing and modifying it to create bioweapons, weapons designed to target specific species, to eradicate entire populations. He channeled all his pain, all his fear, all his hope into a single, focused surge of empathic energy. He projected it outwards, touching the minds of the other prisoners, filling them with a sense of defiance, a refusal to surrender. He felt a ripple of response, a collective surge of hope that echoed through the outpost. Thorn's cybernetic eye locked onto a repeating pattern in the power-dampening field, a momentary dip in intensity, a fleeting vulnerability. It was a long shot, but it was their only chance. The Krill commander descended from the platform, its chitinous armor clicking ominously. The subject's potential is too great to waste, it hissed. Prepare the transference matrix. We will weaponize his empathy directly. With a roar of pure, unadulterated will, Greg unleashed a wave of empathic energy, a tidal wave of raw emotion that crashed against the Krill's systems. Alarms blared, lights flickered, and the Krill scientist staggered back, disoriented and overwhelmed. The holding cell doors hissed open. He stumbled out of the cell, his vision blurring, his body trembling. Terran and Thorn were already there, their restraints broken, their faces grim. "Let's go," Thorn said, his voice tight with urgency. "Now." They raced down a dimly lit corridor, the alarm screaming in their ears. They rounded a corner and stopped dead, a wave of nausea washing over them. Before them lay a laboratory of unimaginable horror. Twisted bodies floated in bubbling vats, their faces frozen in expressions of agony. Genetic material, harvested from countless victims, pulsed in glass containers. The Krill's depravity knew no bounds. A figure stepped out of the shadows at the end of the hall. The Krill commander, its mandibles dripping with venom, held a weapon that pulsed with sickly green light. "Your empathy ends here," it hissed, leveling the weapon at Greg. "This one is designed specifically for your mutation." Greg hardened his face, focusing. He reached out, not with his hands but with his mind, probing the Krill commander's consciousness. It was a chaotic mess of brutal efficiency and cold calculation, but beneath that Greg found a flicker of doubt. He amplified it, a tiny seed of uncertainty blossoming into a full-blown wave of confusion. The commander staggered, his multiple eyes widening, momentarily losing his target lock. Thorn, never one to miss an opportunity, lunged forward. Her prosthetic arm blurred as she brought her modified vibro blade down in a precise arc, severing the weapon arm of the Krill commander with a shower of sparks and acrid smoke. The commander roared, a guttural sound that echoed through the narrow corridor. It retaliated with surprising speed, lashing out with a secondary appendage tipped with razor-sharp claws. Terran, reacting instantly, threw himself in front of Thorn, taking the brunt of the attack. He cried out as the claws ripped across his armored vest, scoring deep gashes in his side. Despite his injuries, Terran scrambled back, adrenaline masking the pain. Greg, Thorn, and Terran surged forward, a desperate tangle of limbs and weapons. Greg used his enhanced strength to pin the commander's remaining arm, while Thorn delivered a stunning blow to its head with the butt of her rifle. The Krill commander slumped to the ground, its multifaceted eyes dimming. They secured the bioweapon, a cylindrical canister humming with restrained energy. Terran leaned against the wall, clutching his side. What is it? He gasped, his face pale. Greg examined the canister. It was crafted from a dark, obsidian-like material etched with intricate Krill glyphs. A small viewport revealed a swirling, iridescent gas within. Something nasty, Greg muttered. He ran a diagnostic scan with his wrist-mounted computer. The results scrolled across the screen, a litany of technical jargon that meant little to him. A genetically engineered virus, he finally said, his voice grim, targeted at Andromedan biology and emotions. Emotions. Thorn frowned. What does that mean? It induces paralyzing fear, Greg said, his brow furrowing. It cripples them, makes them susceptible to the Krill. Terran's eyes widened. A weapon to break our spirit, to make us easier to conquer. Greg's stomach churned. It's airborne, he said, his voice barely a whisper, deployable in a wide radius. He pictured the refugee camp filled with vulnerable Andromedans, their hopes already hanging by a thread. It could wipe out entire populations. He closed his eyes, focusing again, reaching out with his empathy. He felt nothing at first. Then a faint, insidious tendril of something cold and dark brushed against his consciousness. He recoiled, gasping for air. Concentrated fear, he choked out. Engineered, designed to overwhelm. Thorn cursed. There's more, she said, pointing to a small display on the side of the canister. A timer, set to automatically deploy the virus. In that refugee camp we passed not far from here. Terran pushed himself upright, his face etched with purpose despite his pain. We have to stop it, he said. Sabotage the canister. It's heavily shielded, Greg said, examining the casing. Tampering with it could trigger its release. We don't have a choice, Terran insisted. Greg shook his head. Maybe there's another way. He looked at Terran, then at Thorn. I can feel it, he said, his voice low. The fear. The virus is designed to amplify it. What if I could counteract it, create a field of hope, resilience to protect them? Thorn stared at him, her expression skeptical. You're talking about using your empathy against a genetically engineered virus. Greg, that's insane. Your abilities aren't strong enough to counteract something like this. Terran nodded in agreement. It is too dangerous. What if you fail? Greg looked at them, his eyes filled with a quiet perseverance. Then we all die. We have to try. Thorn sighed. All right, she said, but we need a plan. She glanced around the corridor. This place is a dead end. There has to be something nearby. Greg consulted his map. There's a Krill lab, he said, a few hundred meters back, equipped with advanced technology. Maybe we can use their tools to disable the timer, Thorn said, or at least understand what we're dealing with. They moved quickly, Thorn supporting Terran as they retraced their steps. The Krill lab was a sterile, utilitarian space filled with humming machinery and blinking lights. Thorn immediately began examining the timer mechanism on the canister, her fingers flying across the control panel. Krill tech. Always a pain, she muttered. Greg turned his attention to the rest of the lab, hoping to find something, anything that could help them. He ran his hands over the cold metal surfaces, trying to understand the Krill's technology. He focused, reaching out with his empathy, trying to glean information from the machines themselves. I think I've got something, he said, his voice filled with excitement. The virus. It's keyed to a specific frequency, a frequency related to fear. If I can emit a different signal, maybe I can jam it. As Greg worked, a piercing alarm blared through the lab. Red lights flashed, bathing the room in an ominous glow. "We've been detected," Thorne said, her voice grim. "A squad of Krill soldiers is on its way." Thorne managed to disarm the timer with a final click, buying them precious time. But as she pulled away, a stray energy pulse arced from her prosthetic hand, striking the canister. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and a section of the containment field flickered and died. "Damn it," Thorne cursed. "I damaged the containment field." A thin wisp of iridescent gas escaped from the canister, filling the air with a faint, sweet odor. Greg gasped, clutching his head. A wave of terror washed over him, so intense it threatened to overwhelm him. He felt the fear of the refugees amplified 1,000-fold, a tidal wave of despair crashing against his mind. He stumbled back, his vision blurring. We have to do something," he stammered. Thorne grabbed him by the arm. "Greg, focus, we need you." He closed his eyes, fighting to regain control. He knew what he had to do. It would be the most dangerous thing he'd ever attempted, a full-scale, concentrated burst of empathy directed at thousands of people. It could kill him. "We need to amplify the signal," he said, his voice strained. "Use the lab's communication array. Transmit a message of hope, resilience." Terran nodded, his eyes filled with understanding. "I can help," he said. "I know what my people need to hear. I can craft a message that will resonate with them." Thorne looked at them, her expression a mixture of concern and drive. "It's risky," she said. "Using the transmitter will alert every Krill within 100 kilometers." Greg met her gaze, his eyes unwavering. "We don't have a choice," he said. "We have to try." As Greg prepared to broadcast the message, Thorne grabbed her rifle, checking the power cells. "I'll hold them off," she said. "You focus on saving those people." She took a deep breath. "Let's get this done." As Greg prepared to transmit the message, Thorne slammed the lab door shut, the metallic clang swallowed by the whine of plasma fire just outside. Sparks showered from the frame as Thorne's rifle spat emerald bursts, each shot a desperate attempt to hold back the encroaching Krill. Greg's fingers danced across the console, initiating the broadcast sequence. He closed his eyes, picturing Terran's face, his calm demeanor, his unwavering belief in hope. He focused his own empathy, channeling Terran's message, a beacon of resilience, through the Krill communication array, a desperate gamble riding on interspecies understanding. The lab shuddered as Krill soldiers intensified their assault. Alarms blared, strobing red light painting the room in frantic pulses. A section of the ceiling collapsed, showering Greg and Terran with dust and twisted metal. The transmission flickered, threatening to die. Sweat beaded on Greg's forehead. He felt a drain, a gnawing emptiness as the signal fought to break through. But it was more than just fatigue. He felt the Krill's fear, a raw, primal terror amplified and directed, a suffocating wave threatening to overwhelm him. Terran reached out, his three-fingered hand resting gently on Greg's arm. "Breathe, Greg. Focus, let me guide you." Terran initiated a series of slow, deliberate breaths, his chest rising and falling in a rhythmic pattern. Greg mirrored him, drawing on Terran's calm, finding a sliver of peace amidst the chaos. Together, they amplified the signal, pushing back against the tide of fear. Outside, huddled in the makeshift shelters, the Andromedan refugees, paralyzed by terror only moments before, felt a shift. The crushing weight on their chests lessened. A flicker of hope ignited in their eyes, a spark of defiance against the overwhelming despair. An elderly Andromedan woman who had been weeping silently straightened her back. She grabbed a piece of twisted metal from the debris and with a guttural cry charged towards a group of Krill soldiers attempting to breach the perimeter. Others followed her lead, wielding rocks, broken pipes, anything they could find, a desperate, courageous act of resistance. A searing pain ripped through Thorne's shoulder. He grunted, staggering back against the door. A crimson stain bloomed on his armor, but he didn't falter. He raised his rifle again, his face a mask of steadfast perseverance. Keep going. He roared over the din of battle. I've got this. Greg felt it, a subtle but significant shift in the bioweapon's empathic signature. The concentrated fear, the suffocating dread, was starting to dissipate, replaced by a faint echo of hope, a fragile counterpoint to the Krill's terror. The virus leak was slowing, Greg noticed, but not stopping. The air still tasted acrid, and the readings on the console were far from stable. And a new, unsettling development. The Krill soldiers outside were retreating. Greg frowned, his senses on high alert. He didn't trust it. This wasn't a rout. This was something else. They're not giving up, he said, his voice strained. They're regrouping. Thorn, still bleeding, confirmed his fears. The retreating units are converging on the refugee camp. Looks like they're gearing up for a full-scale ground assault. He paused, his voice grim. And I'm picking up a Krill dropship descending towards the camp, probably carrying reinforcements or worse, heavy weaponry. The broadcast had bought them time, precious minutes, but the refugees were still in grave danger. The Krill were adapting, escalating. Greg closed his eyes again, focusing on the receding Krill presence. He felt something else. A guiding force, an amplified fear being used as a signal. It was as if the Krill soldiers were being controlled, directed by the bioweapons output. I think they're receiving the bioweapons signal, Greg said, his eyes snapping open. And that's how they're tracking us, tracking the refugees. The fear is a beacon. He pointed at the console. We need to reverse the process. Use the signal to mislead them, draw them away from the refugee camp. A grim silence fell over the lab. Terran looked at Greg, understanding dawning in his multifaceted eyes. Thorn, leaning heavily against the doorframe, nodded slowly. How do we do that? Greg took a deep breath. We overload the signal. We become the biggest, brightest beacon they've ever seen. We attract as many of those insect bastards as possible. Right here. Greg's fingers danced across the salvaged Krill console, rerouting power conduits with practiced ease. Sparks flew, illuminating the sweat beading on his brow. Almost there, Terran. Just need to bypass this encryption firewall. Seriously, these guys use the same code for their comms array as they do for their toaster ovens. Daphne moved through the makeshift barracks, her prosthetic limb clicking softly against the metal floor. She handed out ration packs and assigned simple tasks, sorting medical supplies, cleaning weapons, comforting the children. Each small action was a tiny anchor in the storm of fear threatening to engulf them. Greg glanced up, his voice tight. Daphne, this overload. It's going to draw every Krill within a click, maybe more. Are you sure about this? Daphne met his gaze, her expression resolute. We have no choice, Greg. We either fight or we die. And if we fight with everything we have. Greg nodded, his eyes hardened. He hit the final override. A low hum filled the air, escalating into a high-pitched whine that vibrated through their bones. On the monitors, the Krill communication network pulsed with chaotic energy. Outside, the effect was immediate. Krill soldiers, previously marching in lockstep, stumbled and swayed, their weapons clattering to the ground. One began firing wildly into the air, while another simply collapsed, clutching its head. Thorn's voice crackled over the comms. General diversion, the main Krill force is turning around. They're heading straight for us. But there was something else in Thorn's tone, a note of confusion. Wait, they're accelerating, faster than I've ever seen them move. What the hell is going on? Inside the barracks, Daphne paused, her brow furrowed. She watched a group of Andromedan children, their eyes wide and bright, their movements strangely energetic. They were laughing, almost hysterically, as they stacked crates far faster than they should have been able to. Greg, she said, her voice tinged with concern. The refugees, they're reacting to something. They have too much energy. Greg frowned, pushing away from the console. That's not possible. The signal's targeted at the Krill neural network. It shouldn't affect. He cut himself off, grabbing a medical scanner. He quickly ran it over a young Andromedan girl. The reading spiked erratically. Damn it. They are reacting. It's in the air. The bioweapon is having a wider range than we thought. Terran frantically typed at his console. Confirmed. The Krill tech is boosting the signal. It's like they're broadcasting it themselves, unwittingly amplifying the effect on everyone nearby. A deafening roar echoed through the air. The ground trembled. Dropship incoming. Thorn yelled over the comms. Brace for impact. A Krill dropship slammed into the ground just outside the barracks, its ramp hissing open. A squad of heavily armored Krill soldiers emerged, their movements precise and coordinated. They were less affected by the signal overload, their eyes focused and their weapons steady. Greg cursed under his breath. They're adapting. They're learning to filter out the noise. He and Terran frantically adjusted the signal frequency, creating a more erratic and disruptive pattern. The hum intensified, the air crackling with static. Counter signal detected. Thorn reported, his voice strained. The lead Krill units are deploying a dampening field. It's weakening the broadcast. Greg banged his head on the console. We're running out of time. The only way to stop this is to get closer to the source to disable that bioweapon amplifier. Daphne stepped forward, her expression grim. That's suicide, Greg. It's too dangerous. It's our only chance, Greg countered, his eyes blazing with grit. But we can't do it alone. We need a diversion. Someone needs to draw those Krill away from the camp, buy us some time. He paused, then pointed towards the captured Krill transport parked nearby. A small team. We use their own vehicle against them. Greg, Thorn, and Terran squeezed into the captured Krill vehicle. The interior smelled of chitin and something vaguely metallic, a sterile, unsettling odor that clung to the back of Greg's throat. The controls were alien, angular protrusions that glowed with a faint, sickly green light. Thorn, ever the pragmatist, was already running diagnostics, his fingers dancing across the unfamiliar interface. Cloaking device operational, weapon systems. Mostly functional. This thing's a wreck, but it'll do. Daphne approached Greg, her violet eyes filled with a mixture of concern and tenacity. She held out a small, intricately carved piece of andromed jade. It was shaped like a stylized bird, its wings outstretched in flight. For luck, she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. My mother gave it to me. It's a symbol of hope, of safe passage. The jade felt cool and smooth in his palm, a tangible weight that connected him to her world, her people. He closed his fingers around it. Thank you, Daphne, I'll bring it back. The Krill vehicle rumbled to life, its engines emitting a low, guttural growl. Terran, piloting, eased it out of the makeshift hangar and into the desolate landscape. The diversion team departed, heading towards the main Krill force, a small, stolen vessel venturing into the heart of the enemy. The cloaking device sputtered, the vehicle flickering momentarily in and out of visibility. Damn it, Thorn cursed, his fingers flying across the control panel. Cloaking modulators glitching. I can't get a stable lock. The vehicle shimmered again, betraying their position for a split second. We need to fix this, and fast. He pulled a panel away, revealing a tangle of wires and glowing circuits. The air crackled with energy. Suddenly, Thorn stiffened. Drones, Krill patrol heading our way. Bearing 070, distance approximately 5 kilometers. Terran banked sharply, sending the vehicle careening through a narrow ravine. Can't outrun them in this bucket of bolts. We need to lose them. The vehicle lurched violently as Terran navigated the treacherous terrain, the cloaking device flickering erratically. As they rounded a bend, Greg spotted it, a small, squat structure built into the side of a cliff. Krill symbols were etched into the metal plating. Outpost, he shouted. Small facility, probably used for monitoring the area. Greg made a quick decision. We can't risk being detected. We need to take it out. It will disrupt their communications if nothing else. Terran brought the vehicle to a screeching halt behind a rocky outcrop. Terran grabbed a pack of explosives from the storage compartment. I'll plant the charges. Give me 5 minutes. Terran scrambled towards the outpost, while Greg and Thorn took up positions behind the vehicle, weapons raised. The air was thick with tension, the silence broken only by the hum of the Krill vehicle's engines and the distant whine of the patrol drones. A muffled explosion rocked the ground, sending a cloud of dust and debris billowing into the air. The Krill outpost was gone, reduced to a smoking crater. "Let's move," Greg yelled. "That explosion will have alerted every Krill within a 10-kilometer radius." Back at the refugee camp, chaos was erupting. The Andromedans, normally a placid and reserved people, were exhibiting strange behavior. Their movements were jerky and erratic, their voices raised in angry shouts. Fights were breaking out, small skirmishes escalating into full-blown brawls. The refugees' increased energy manifested as heightened aggression, leading to infighting. Daphne, her face grim, struggled to maintain order. Her security team, armed with stun batons, were overwhelmed by the sudden surge of violence. "What's happening to them?" She shouted over the din, firing her own stunner at a group of brawling Andromedans. Daphne isolated the most aggressive refugees, herding them into a secure containment area. It was a desperate measure, but she had no other choice. The strange behavior was spreading like a contagion, threatening to tear the camp apart. Greg's voice crackled over Daphne's comm. "Daphne, this is Greg. We've destroyed the outpost, but we've alerted a larger Krill force. What's the situation at the camp?" Daphne took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. "It's not good, Greg. The refugees are becoming violent, aggressive. I don't know what's causing it." There was a pause, then Greg's voice, tight with urgency. "Daphne, I think I know. It's related to the bioweapon. The Krill aren't just trying to wipe you out, they're trying to control you. That weapon acts like a drug, making them easier to control." He continued, "That means they are going to use the refugees as shock troopers." The realization hit Daphne like a physical blow. The Krill weren't just conquerors, they were manipulators, turning her own people into weapons against themselves. "We have to stop them," she said, her voice filled with persistence. The diversion team encountered the main Krill force, a squadron of heavily armed vehicles bearing down on them. "Here we go," Terran muttered, slamming the accelerator. "Hold on tight." The Krill vehicle roared, weaving through the canyon at breakneck speed, the Krill force hot on their tail. Suddenly, the Krill force deployed a swarm of seeker drones, small, agile machines that swarmed towards them like angry insects. "Drones incoming," Thorn shouted. "Evasive maneuvers." Terran threw the vehicle into a series of hairpin turns, the drones nipping at their heels. "I have an idea," Terran said, his fingers flying across the control panel. "I can modify the cloaking device to emit a jamming signal, disrupt the drone's guidance systems." He worked frantically, sweat dripping from his brow. Almost, there." The cloaking device sputtered, then emitted a high-pitched whine. The seeker drones faltered, their movements becoming erratic. One by one, they crashed into the canyon walls, their circuits fried. A blast of energy slammed into the Krill vehicle, sending it spinning out of control. "We've been hit," Thorn yelled. "Shields are down, engines failing." Terran wrestled with the controls, but it was no use. The vehicle limped to a halt, smoke billowing from its damaged engine. "We have to abandon it," Greg shouted. Now, they scrambled out of the crippled vehicle, weapons in hand. The Krill force Wasson, osing in. They reached a predetermined rendezvous point, a small clearing where a shuttle was waiting to extract them. As they prepared to board the shuttle, a squad of Krill soldiers burst from the undergrowth, weapons blazing. A bolt of energy seared through the air, striking Thorn in the leg. He cried out in pain, collapsing to the ground. Thorn gasped, his breath rattling in his chest like loose gravel. Sweat plastered his dark hair to his forehead, and his face was now a disturbing shade of gray. "Damn it," Greg muttered, ripping open another med pack. His internal bleeding's getting worse. He pressed a field bandage against Thorn's abdomen, but the blood soaked through almost immediately. "Hold this," Greg instructed, pressing Thorn's own hand against the bandage. "Apply pressure, as much as you can stand." Greg knew it wasn't enough. Minimal supplies were an understatement. All they had were glorified first aid kits. He glanced at the shuttle pilot, a wiry android named Vela, who was monitoring the instruments. How much further to the rendezvous point? Vela's multifaceted eyes flickered. At our current speed, nearly an hour, but she hesitated. There's an abandoned medical facility according to the nav charts, a small one. It's a short diversion from our path, maybe 20 minutes. Greg cursed under his breath. An hour might be too long for Thorn. We'll take it, he decided, turning back to his patient. Hang in there, Thorn. We're getting you real help. He knew it was a half-truth. An abandoned facility was a gamble, but it was better than nothing. Meanwhile, at the refugee camp, the atmosphere had curdled. What had started as desperate pleas for food and medicine were now punctuated by angry shouts and shoves. Daphne, her face grim, watched as two refugees, both gaunt and hollow-eyed, wrestled over a meager ration pack. Enough, she barked, her voice amplified by her vocoder. She moved with a speed that belied her prosthetic limb, intercepting the fight. As she reached for the ration pack, one of the refugees, a woman with stringy hair, swung at her with surprising force. The blow connected with Daphne's armored shoulder, staggering her slightly. The force was wrong, more than desperation. It was raw, animalistic strength. Daphne's security team moved in, subduing the two refugees with stun batons. But even as they restrained them, Daphne noticed something else. A disturbing gleam in their eyes, a feverish intensity that transcended mere hunger. Later, back in the command tent, Daphne reviewed the data logs from the security team's neural scanners. Report, she commanded. Increased aggression levels in several refugee sectors, Commander. Her second-in-command, a burly android named Jax, reported. Fights breaking out more frequently. Strength readings are anomalous. Anomalous how? Daphne pressed, her gaze sharp. Jax hesitated. Above normal levels, Commander, significantly. We're seeing refugees exhibiting strength capabilities that should be impossible, given their physical condition. Daphne pulled up the refugees' medical records, cross-referencing them with the scanner data. A chill ran down her spine. The readings were consistent. Elevated dopamine levels, hyperstimulation of muscle fibers, and something else, an artificial signature buried deep within their neural pathways. Run a diagnostic on known bioweapon markers, she ordered, her voice tight. Krill's signature specifically. The results came back moments later, stark and undeniable. Confirmed, Commander, Jax said, his voice grave. Krill bioweapon detected, targeting the brain's pleasure centers and muscle groups. Daphne swore, a guttural sound of fury and disgust. Those bastards, she hissed. They're not just trying to kill us, they're turning us into weapons. She realized with horror that the Krill were sacrificing the refugees, twisting their desperation into a tool of war. Back on the shuttle, Greg felt a jolt as the vessel touched down. We're here, Vela announced. Medical facility is approximately 5 minutes on foot. Greg quickly prepped Thorn for transport. All right, buddy, he said, his voice strained but encouraging. Let's get you inside. He helped Thorn to his feet, supporting his weight as they disembarked into the oppressive silence of the abandoned facility. The air hung heavy with the stench of decay and disinfectant. Flickering emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across the deserted corridors. Dust motes danced in the pale beams, creating an eerie, unsettling atmosphere. As Greg began treating Thorn, attempting to set up a field drip and redress the wound, he noticed something odd. A series of small, almost invisible sensors embedded in the walls. He frowned, running his hand along the cool, metallic surface of one of the sensors. It felt wrong. Suddenly, a red light flashed, accompanied by a piercing klaxon. Warning, a synthesized voice boomed through the facility. Intruder alert. Security protocols engaged. Before Greg could react, the ceiling panels hissed open and a swarm of sleek black drones descended, their weapons glowing with menacing energy. Drones. Greg yelled, shoving Thorn behind an overturned medical console. He drew his sidearm, a pulse pistol, and opened fire. The drones were fast and agile, weaving through the corridors with deadly precision. Thorn, despite his injuries, managed to pull himself into a sitting position, drawing his own weapon. Together they fought off the drones, the air filled with the crackle of energy weapons and the whine of damaged machinery. After what felt like an eternity, the last drone sputtered and fell, its circuits fried. But the battle had taken its toll. The shuttle parked just outside the facility was riddled with scorch marks. One of the engines was visibly damaged, its casing cracked and smoking. Vela rushed inside, her face pale. "The shuttle's hit. I can repair it, but it'll take time. At least an hour." Back at the refugee camp, Daphne was desperately trying to contact Greg, her fingers flying across the comm panel. "Lewis, do you read? This is Commander Daphne. We have a situation at the camp, Krill bioweapon." But her message was met with static, interference likely from the Krill jamming signals. Frustration surged through her. She needed to warn Greg, but she was cut off. Then the alarms blared. The refugees, driven mad by the bioweapon, had breached the security perimeter. Daphne raced outside, her pulse rifle raised. The scene that greeted her was one of utter chaos. The enhanced refugees, their eyes glowing with unnatural intensity, were tearing through the camp, attacking anyone and everyone. Screams echoed through the air as the uninfected refugees desperately tried to flee. But there was nowhere to run. The enhanced refugees were too strong, too fast, too merciless. Daphne planted her feet, her prosthetic limb whirring as it adjusted to the uneven terrain. She raised her pulse rifle, her aim steady. She had to protect the uninfected, even if it meant killing those who had once been her people. The first enhanced refugee charged at her, a hulking figure with bulging muscles and a snarling face. Daphne fired, a burst of energy slamming into the refugee's chest. The refugee staggered but kept coming, fueled by the bioweapon's insidious power. More enhanced refugees swarmed towards her, their movements frenzied and unpredictable. Daphne fought with unshakable focus, her pulse rifle spitting death. But they kept coming, wave after wave, their numbers seemingly endless. One of her security personnel fell, a plasma blade piercing his armor. Another was crushed beneath the weight of two enhanced refugees. Daphne's resources were dwindling, and the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. As she fought, a horrifying realization dawned on her. The Krill hadn't just introduced the bioweapon. They had deliberately weakened the refugees beforehand, depriving them of food and medicine, making them more susceptible to its effects. They had weaponized their desperation, turning them against their own kind. A garbled message crackled through Greg's comlink as he was trying to redress Thorn's wound. "Camp, attack, bioweapon." It was Daphne, but the transmission was breaking up, almost unintelligible. All he could make out was attack and bioweapon. "Daphne, repeat, what's happening?" He shouted into the comm, but only static answered him. He cursed, pounding his fist against the console. He had to get back there, but Thorn. Vela approached, her face grim. "The engine damage is worse than I thought. It'll take at least 2 hours to repair, maybe more." She paused, her multifaceted eyes meeting Greg's. "We're stuck here. 2 hours." 2 hours for Daphne to fend off whatever was happening at the refugee camp. 2 hours for Thorn to bleed out. Greg stared at Thorn, his face pale and drawn. Then he looked back at Vela. "We're going back," he said, his voice firm. "We can't leave them to die." Thorn coughed, a fleck of blood staining his lips. "The diversion, Lewis," he croaked. "It's the only way to stop them. Prevent more attacks." Greg knelt beside him, his gaze intense. "I know, Thorn, but I can't just stand by and let those people get slaughtered. Not again." He knew he was making a choice, a difficult one, but his conscience wouldn't allow him to do anything else. "We're aborting the mission," he told Thorn, his voice heavy with the weight of the decision. "We're going back to the refugee camp." Thorn stared at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of pain and disbelief. "You can't," he whispered. "You can't throw it all away. You can't throw it all away." Greg turned, the plea hanging in the air. The refugee camp was a churning vortex of fear and violence. Injured lay gasping, their alien physiology struggling against wounds both familiar and disturbingly new. The air thrummed with the guttural roars of the enhanced refugees, like the others but warped, their muscles grotesquely swollen, eyes burning with a manic, unfocused rage as they turned on the uninfected. "Damn it," Greg muttered, shoving aside a piece of twisted metal. The immediate threat wasn't the krill anymore, it was each other. Daphne, her face grim, was already barking orders in rapid Andromedan. "Lewis, we need a triage protocol now. Prioritize the uninfected, contain those things." Their skills meshed instantly, a grim dance honed by shared trauma. Greg, his medical training kicking in, began assessing the wounded, his experienced eyes quickly cataloging the horrific symptoms of whatever bioweapon the krill had unleashed. Accelerated muscle growth, yes, but the tremors, the vacant stares, compromised neural function, definitely. Daphne, despite the obvious pain etched on her face, directed security teams, a handful of able-bodied refugees armed with scavenged energy weapons, to establish a perimeter, her voice sharp and commanding. "Containment is paramount. Do not fire unless necessary. Non-lethal force only." "It's a protein-based compound, looks like," Greg said, kneeling beside a convulsing Andromedan. "Accelerated muscle synthesis. But it's frying their brains. We need something to inhibit the protein chains." He glanced around at the meager medical supplies, then at the strange, bioluminescent flora clinging to the wreckage of the shuttle. "And I need a lab." Daphne, barking a final order to her security team, limped back to Greg. "Thorn is coordinating defense from the comm station. He can't move much, but that old man still has a mind for war." Suddenly, the ground shuddered. Another wave of krill fighters screamed overhead, their bioplasma cannons spitting emerald fire. This time they weren't targeting the perimeter, they were aiming for the medical triage area. "They're trying to wipe us out," Daphne yelled, shoving Greg behind a makeshift barricade. "They know we're trying to help. Then we don't give them the chance," Greg replied, his voice hardening. "You take the defense. I'll stay here, protect the wounded, and try to cook up something to stop this damn thing." As Daphne moved to rally the defense, Greg stared into the eyes of an infected refugee, a young Andromedan woman whose enhanced muscles bulged against her torn uniform, her eyes wide with panic. He reached out to calm her, but she flinched away, her breath ragged. "The pain," she gasped, clawing at her own face. "It burns." Pain. Greg's mind raced. The bioweapon wasn't just warping their bodies and minds, it was amplifying their pain sensitivity. That explained the aggression, the uncontrolled rage. They weren't just infected, they were suffering, driven mad by agony. Outside, the battle raged. Energy weapons flashed, illuminating the grotesque figures of the enhanced refugees as they tore through the barricades, their roars echoing through the camp. Daphne and her security team fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered, outmatched. Thorn's voice crackled over the comm, strained but steady. "Daphne, the krill. They're not just attacking randomly. There's a pattern. They're focusing on specific sectors." "What are they after?" Daphne shouted back, firing a burst of energy at an onrushing enhanced refugee. "I don't know," Thorn replied. "But they're trying to capture specific refugees. High-value targets, I'd wager." Inside the triage area, Greg worked feverishly, grinding local flora with a mortar and pestle, mixing the pulpy substance with salvaged medical compounds. He needed to isolate the protein inhibitors, stabilize the concoction, find a way to administer it. A searing pain ripped through his shoulder. He cried out, stumbling back, his vision blurring. He looked down to see an infected refugee standing over him, claws extended, eyes burning with pain and rage. He barely had time to react before Daphne, her prosthetic leg sparking, slammed into the infected, sending them both crashing to the ground. "Get back to work, Lewis," she yelled, wrestling with the enhanced refugee. "I can't hold them off forever." Daphne managed to subdue the refugee, but not without cost. A deep gash ran across her side and she staggered back, clutching the wound. I need medical attention," she gasped, collapsing against the wall. As Greg rushed to her side, a deafening explosion rocked the camp. The lights flickered and died, plunging the triage area into darkness. "The shuttle!" someone screamed. They hit the shuttle. Greg peered out into the night. The evacuation shuttle, their only escape, was engulfed in flames, its engines sputtering and dying. They were trapped. Thorne's voice, filled with grim resignation, came over the comm. "They're closing in, Daphne. They know we're here. They know we're trapped." Then a new voice, cold and mechanical, filled the comm channel. "Krill." "Humans, Andromeda, traitor," the voice hissed, the words translated into choppy, synthesized English. "Surrender the key refugees to us, or face total annihilation." Greg, Daphne, and Thorne exchanged a look of stunned disbelief. The key refugees. What did the Krill want? They huddled together, the flickering emergency lights casting long, distorted shadows on their faces. The wounded refugees watched them with wide, fearful eyes. The sounds of the enhanced refugees, their guttural roars, and the sickening thud of their fists against the med bay doors grew louder, closer. "Surrender them." Daphne spat, her good hand slamming against the metal table, the impact echoing in the tense silence. "Never. We do not bargain with monsters, we fight them." Her eyes, usually bright with intelligence, blazed with a fierce, protective anger. Thorne sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Daphne, we're talking about the survival of everyone here. If the Krill want those refugees and we refuse, they'll simply wipe us all out. We need to be realistic." Greg, who had been silently observing, spoke, his voice low but firm. "There's another option, the antidote. It's not a cure, but it weakens the bioweapon's effects. If we administer it, even in limited quantities, we could buy ourselves some time, weaken the infected before they reach us." A tense silence hung in the air as they considered the options. Finally, Thorne nodded slowly. "All right, we transmit a false agreement. Promise to surrender the refugees, but prepare a counterattack. Greg, can you administer the antidote?" "I can," Greg confirmed, already moving towards the medical supplies. "But it won't be enough for everyone. We'll have to prioritize the most vulnerable." He selected a small group of children and elderly refugees, carefully injecting them with the precious fluid. A faint shimmer passed over their skin and their ragged breathing eased. It was a start, but the vials were nearly empty. As Greg worked, Thorne hunched over the Krill transmission, his fingers flying across the console. "I've found something," he announced, his voice tight. "A hidden code. They're not just after any refugees. They have a specific target." A moment later, Thorne pointed to a holographic image of a young Andromedan girl, no older than 10, her eyes wide with fear. "This one. They want her. She possesses unique genetic markers. Something related to Andromedan bioweapon resistance." Greg and Daphne exchanged a grim look. "They want to study her," Greg realized, his voice hardening. "Weaponize her resistance against the rest of our people." Suddenly, a metallic screech echoed through the triage area as the enhanced refugees, their eyes glowing with feverish intensity, smashed through the makeshift barricades. The attack had begun. "Defend the med bay," Daphne roared, her voice cutting through the chaos. Despite her injuries, she threw herself into the fray, her prosthetic limb a blur of motion as she slammed infected refugees back. Greg scooped up the Andromedan girl, cradling her in his arms. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he muttered, weaving through the panicked crowd, dodging flailing limbs and grotesque, contorted faces. He found a small storage closet near the back of the triage area and gently placed her inside. "Stay here, I'll be back." Returning to the main area, Greg saw the infected were overwhelming Daphne's defenses. He needed a solution and fast. His eyes fell on the remaining vials of antidote. An idea, desperate and risky, formed in his mind. A concentrated dose. It might temporarily neutralize the bioweapon's effects, but it would require a significant amount of their dwindling supply. He looked at the faces of the refugees, the healthy and the infected, and he knew what he had to do. It was a gamble and many would suffer, but he could not let the krill get the girl. He was snapped out of his thoughts as Daphne fell to one knee, her prosthetic arm sparking and smoking, a gash across her forehead bleeding freely. "Greg, the antidote, protect it," she yelled before smashing an infected refugee to the ground with her fist. Greg nodded grimly and grabbed the remaining vials. "I'm on it." He began to administer concentrated doses to the refugees closest to the storage closet, creating a small zone of relative safety around the Andromedan girl. The treated refugees gasped, their bodies convulsing as the antidote fought the infection. It was working, but the cost was high. A high-pitched whine filled the air as a krill dropship descended, hovering just outside the triage area. The krill had detected the use of the antidote and were launching a direct assault. Greg, Daphne, Thorn, and the remaining uninfected refugees braced themselves for the final stand. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted, but they would not surrender. Inside the storage closet, the Andromedan girl watched the chaos unfold, her eyes wide with terror and a dawning understanding. She saw Daphne's sacrifice, Greg's bravery, the desperation in the refugees' eyes. A faint glow began to emanate from her skin, a subtle bioluminescence that pulsed with increasing intensity. A soft hum filled the closet, growing louder, resonating with a frequency that seemed to vibrate the very air. The krill warriors and the enhanced refugees faltered, their movements becoming sluggish, their eyes losing focus. The sonic frequencies were disrupting their neural pathways, stunning them, weakening them. As the enhanced refugees and the krill began to be stunned, the girl looked at Greg, her eyes glowing with newfound drive. "I can help," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but filled with a power she was only beginning to understand. The Andromedan girl, Elara, screamed, not a cry of pain, but a pure, raw tone that vibrated in Greg's teeth. A wave of shimmering energy pulsed outwards, visibly distorting the air. The krill warriors staggered, their chitinous armor momentarily shimmering like heat haze. Even the enhanced refugees, their bodies grotesquely swollen, seemed to pause, their movements sluggish. "Her!" Daphne shouted, her voice tight with urgency. "She's reacting to the bioweapon." Greg lunged forward, reaching for Elara. He remembered the feeling of his daughter's small hand in his. "Easy, easy," he murmured, his voice low and soothing. He pressed his palm gently against her forehead, focusing all his energy on projecting calm. "It's all right, you're safe." Slowly, the sonic waves subsided, becoming less intense. Elara's breathing evened out, though her eyes remained wide with fear. Thorn's voice crackled over the comms. "Lewis, that sonic emission. I'm picking up a distinct frequency pattern. It's disrupting krill comms, their coordination is falling apart." Greg glanced at Thorn, a spark of hope igniting in his chest. "Can we weaponize it?" "Potentially," Thorn responded, his voice tight. "I need time to analyze it, but right now it's our only advantage." Greg didn't hesitate. He grabbed a discarded medical scanner, ripped out its focusing lens, and began jury-rigging it to a portable amplifier. "Daphne, keep her calm. Thorn, give me those frequencies." He worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. This was what he did, what he was good at, fixing things, making them work, no matter how impossible the odds. Within minutes, he had created a makeshift sonic emitter, focusing Elara's power into a localized defensive field. For a precious few seconds, it worked. The krill faltered, their advance stalled by the amplified sonic waves, but the respite was brief. With a hiss, the krill deployed small, metallic devices that clung to the walls and pulsed with a dull, red light. Sonic dampeners. Thorn yelled. "They're adapting." The effect was immediate. Alara's sonic waves weakened, becoming a mere tremor. The krill, their coordination restored, surged forward. The enhanced refugees, recovering from the initial blast, focused their attacks on Greg's modified medical equipment, their mutated limbs flailing wildly. Daphne roared, a primal sound filled with rage and defiance. She threw herself in front of Alara, her prosthetic limb a blur of motion as she deflected a blow from a refugee's clawed hand. The metal of her prosthetic screeched against the refugee's bone. She moved with a ferocity that belied her earlier distress, a whirlwind of lethal grace. Greg, seeing an opportunity, grabbed a vial of the antidote. "Thorn, can we vaporize this stuff?" "The antidote?" "Theoretically, yes," Thorn replied, his voice strained. "Why?" "I think Alara's sonic waves can help," Greg shouted, barely audible over the din. "If we vaporize it and expose it to her power, maybe it'll neutralize the bioweapon." Greg worked feverishly, jury-rigging a vaporizer from a broken respirator. He carefully loaded the vial of antidote, his hands trembling slightly. The supply was critically low, enough for maybe one, maybe two applications. He activated the vaporizer, a thin mist of the antidote filling the air around Alara. It worked. The swelling on the refugees nearest to Alara lessened, their agonized moans subsiding. But the krill weren't deterred. They launched a coordinated attack, focusing their fire on the vaporizer. A plasma blast seared past Greg's head, melting the metal casing of the device. Daphne, seeing the danger, threw herself in front of the vaporizer, shielding it with her body. A krill blade sliced across her side, tearing through her armor and flesh. She cried out, but she didn't falter. She stood her ground, her face contorted with pain and commitment. "Daphne." Greg yelled, scrambling towards her. She waved him away, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "Keep it running," she managed to choke out, her hand pressed against the wound. Greg stared at the vaporizer, its delicate components exposed and vulnerable. The gas was only effective within a limited radius. Those on the periphery, those furthest from Alara, would remain exposed to the bioweapon. Thorn's voice, tight with urgency, cut through the chaos. "Lewis, I've intercepted a krill transmission. They're planning to detonate a localized EMP. Target Alara. They think it will disable her powers." Greg's mind raced. The EMP would shut down the vaporizer, leaving everyone vulnerable. But it would also neutralize Alara, their only weapon against the bioweapon. He looked at Daphne, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with pain. He looked at Alara, her small face etched with fear and confusion. He looked at the refugees, their bodies swelling, their lives hanging in the balance. He and Daphne exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them. There wasn't enough antidote for everyone. They had to make a choice. Protect Alara and those closest to her, or distribute the antidote thinly, reducing its effectiveness and risking everyone. Greg swallowed hard, the weight of the decision crushing him. "We concentrate the antidote," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Protect Alara, protect those closest to her." Daphne nodded, her face grim. "The rest, we buy them time," Greg finished, his heart aching. He and Daphne worked quickly, moving the remaining vials of antidote closer to Alara, creating a small, protected zone. The refugees on the periphery, realizing what was happening, cried out in despair, their pleas lost in the din of battle. Suddenly, the air crackled with energy. A high-pitched whine filled the triage area, growing louder and more intense. Alara began to tremble, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Her powers surged uncontrollably, creating a feedback loop that threatened to overload her system. "The EMP!" Thorn screamed. "It's overloading her. Lewis, get her out of there." But it was too late. A blinding flash engulfed the triage area, followed by a deafening roar. The world dissolved into white. Greg threw his arm over his eyes, shielding himself from the blast. He felt a searing heat, a wave of energy that washed over him, threatening to tear him apart. Then silence. He lowered his arm, his vision blurring. The triage area was bathed in an eerie white light. He couldn't see Daphne. He couldn't see Alara. He couldn't see anything. Had they saved anyone, or had they doomed them all? Saved them all, the ringing. A high-pitched whine that threatened to shatter his skull layered over the low groan of failing systems. The air crackled with ozone, sharp and acrid in his nostrils. Greg blinked, his vision swimming. The world had gone silent, eerily so, after the screeching chaos of moments before. Alara. He scrambled towards her, his hands finding empty air where the medical equipment had been. The EMP. It had fried everything, including, he feared, her. He spotted her a few feet away, slumped against a wall, thankfully still breathing, unconscious but alive. Her powers, for now, were suppressed. Around them, a small pocket of refugees coughed and sputtered, the air blessedly clear. The concentrated antidote gas, a desperate measure, had worked, creating a bubble of safety. But beyond that bubble, Greg's stomach churned. Figures lay still, limbs twitching weakly, the bioweapon claiming them with horrifying speed. Daphne. He turned to find her clutching her side, her face pale. "I'm fine," she gasped, but her voice lacked its usual steel. He saw the tremor in her organic hand as she gripped the ruined remains of her prosthetic limb, sparks still flickering from its damaged casing. The prosthetic was beyond repair, and he could see the bleeding was far worse than she let on. Internal. "Communications are down," Thorne's voice cut through the silence. "The EMP took out everything, including long range. We're cut off. Isolated, vulnerable, and the Krill knew it. A renewed assault slammed into their makeshift defenses, plasma fire scorching the walls. The Krill, sensing weakness, were pressing their advantage, their insectoid screeches echoing through the triage bay. Their target was clear, Alara, but the Krill weren't the only threat. The enhanced refugees, their brief moment of power amplified by the Krill mutagen now fading, were turning on each other. The antidote was finite, space was limited, and desperation bred violence. Greg watched in disgust as two hulking figures wrestled over a half-empty canister of nutrient paste, their roars drowning out the cries of the dying. He had to do something. Anything. Greg might not be a soldier, but he was a medic, and medics improvised. He grabbed a discarded IV stand, welding it to a broken medical scanner with jury-rigged power cables, creating a makeshift taser. Another scanner became a proximity mine, rigged to explode with a flashbang of light and sound. "I need you to guide me," he yelled to Daphne over the din of battle. "Tell me where they're coming from." Despite her injury, Daphne refused to be sidelined. Leaning heavily on a discarded crate, she used her remaining mobility to survey the battlefield, her keen eyes spotting Krill movements that Greg would have missed. "Left flank, 3 meters. And watch out for the ceiling vents, they're trying to flank us." She barked, her tactical mind still sharp despite the pain. "I found something," Thorne shouted, rummaging through the wreckage of the medical equipment. He held up a small, battered power cell. Backup power source, enough to power. Maybe one device for a short time. Greg's mind raced. One device. What could make the biggest difference? Then it hit him. The sonic emitter, the one we were using to try and stabilize Alara. If we can recalibrate it. Recalibrate it to what? Daphne asked, her brow furrowed. To Alara's specific frequency, Greg replied, already stripping wires from a damaged console. Maybe we can disrupt the Krill's communication network. Give us an edge. As he worked fiddling with the emitter's shattered display, he noticed something strange. The Krill bioweapon, whatever it was, seemed to be reacting to the sonic emitter's diagnostic pulse, a specific frequency of light. Daphne, I think the bioweapon is vulnerable to light. A specific frequency, but we'd need a high-intensity beam. Daphne's eyes narrowed, considering. The medical laser, the one we used for surgery, can you modify it? A plan began to form, desperate and improbable, but it was a plan. I can try, but we need to recalibrate the sonic emitter first, and keep those enhanced crazies off our backs. The enhanced refugees, sensing a shift in power, were growing bolder. Two of them, their eyes burning with feverish intensity, lunged for the sonic emitter, snarling. "That power is ours. We'll use it to save ourselves." Greg, armed with his jury-rigged taser, intercepted them, the weapon crackling with energy. Daphne, despite her injury, moved with surprising speed, slamming a metal rod into the legs of another attacker. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they wouldn't yield. A keening wail pierced the air. Elara. She was awake, but her eyes were wide with terror, her body trembling. Sonic energy crackled around her, arcing wildly, sending equipment flying. Her powers were unstable, uncontrolled. "Elara, it's okay," Greg yelled, trying to approach her. He remembered how holding her had calmed her before, but as he reached out, she flinched, her eyes filled with panic. "Stay away," she shrieked, and a concussive blast of sonic energy slammed into Greg, sending him reeling. He hit the ground hard, his head exploding with pain. Daphne rushed to Elara's side, watching the child with concern. "She's afraid," Daphne said, her voice soft, a stark contrast to the chaos around them. "She's afraid of her own powers, of what she can do." Daphne knelt before Elara, speaking in her native Andromedan tongue. Greg couldn't understand the words, but he could hear the soothing rhythm of her voice, the gentle cadence. It was a story, he realized, a story meant to calm and reassure. He watched Daphne gesture to her ruined prosthetic limb, her expression conveying a message of resilience, of overcoming limitations. She was telling Elara that even broken things could be strong, that limitations could be overcome, that power could be controlled. Just as the Krill breached the last of their defenses, their chitinous bodies swarming through the wreckage, Elara's eyes focused. The uncontrolled energy subsided, replaced by a fierce dedication. She raised her hands, and a concentrated beam of sonic energy shot forth, directly at the Krill communication array. The screeching of the Krill intensified, then abruptly cut off as their network went silent. "Now, Greg," Daphne yelled. Greg, still dazed but driven by adrenaline, scrambled to his feet and activated the modified medical laser. A beam of intense light lanced out, striking the Krill soldiers. They recoiled, their chitinous armor smoking, their movements faltering. The light was working, but the silence didn't last. A low, guttural growl echoed through the triage bay, growing louder with each passing second. The ground trembled. Daphne's eyes widened in horror. "Krill Heavy Assault Unit. Advanced shielding. It's heading this way." The modified laser spat another bolt of energy, momentarily flaring against the Krill Heavy Assault Unit's iridescent carapace before dissipating like a struck match. Its energy shields, shimmering with violet light, absorbed the impact with contemptuous ease. The Krill, a hulking monstrosity of chitin and metal, continued its inexorable advance toward Elara, its multifaceted eyes glinting with cold purpose. Daphne, her face pale with pain from her injured leg, saw the Krill's unwavering focus. It wants her, it's prioritizing Elara. A plan, desperate and reckless, formed in her mind. "Greg, I can draw it away. Give you both time." Before Greg could protest, Daphne pushed herself forward, limping towards a narrow maintenance corridor branching off the main thoroughfare. "Here, you overgrown insect. Come and get me," she yelled, her voice strained but defiant. She knew it was a gamble, sacrificing what little mobility she had, but Elara was the priority. The enhanced refugees huddled nearby watched Daphne's gambit with calculating eyes. One of them, a hulking Andromedan with bio-engineered claws, muttered, "She's trying to be a hero. Stupid. We could bargain with that thing, offer it her for safe passage." Several others nodded in agreement, their eyes fixed on Daphne's retreating form. They began to creep forward, intent on capturing her. Greg, seeing their intent, roared, "Get away from her." He charged towards the refugees, firing a stun burst from his sidearm. The energy slammed into the lead refugee, sending him sprawling. But others surged forward, their enhanced strength and speed overwhelming Greg. He fought them off, landing blows that echoed sickeningly in the confined space, but he couldn't hold them all. "Get out of here, I can't hold them." Greg yelled to Daphne, but it was too late. The Krill unit was already lumbering into the corridor after her. Inside the corridor, Alara watched Daphne's sacrifice, her face contorted with guilt and terror. A high-pitched whine escaped her lips, escalating into a painful shriek. The lights flickered violently, and the metal walls of the corridor vibrated. Her powers, triggered by the overwhelming emotions, were spiraling out of control. Greg, still battling the refugees, noticed the resonance. The Krill's energy shields, normally impervious, flickered erratically with each of Alara's sonic bursts. "Alara, your powers, they're affecting its shields." He realized that the sonic waves were creating temporary vulnerabilities in the Krill's defenses. An idea, risky but potentially life-saving, sparked in his mind. He broke away from the fight, scrambling towards the modified laser rifle. He ripped open its casing, bypassing several safety protocols with practiced ease. "Alara, I need you to focus. I can amplify your powers, but we need to time it right." He began reconfiguring the laser to emit a pulsed beam, timed to coincide with Alara's sonic bursts. Alara, still trembling, shook her head. I can't, I'll hurt you, I'll hurt everyone." The fear of losing control paralyzed her. Greg dropped the laser, turning to face Alara. "Listen to me. I know what it's like to be afraid. To be afraid of your own power." He took a deep breath, the memories flooding back. I had a daughter a long time ago. She was sick and there was a chance, a risky procedure that might have saved her. But I was too afraid of the risk, afraid of failing, so I didn't do it. And she died. His voice cracked with the weight of his regret. He stepped closer, placing a hand gently on Alara's shoulder. "Failing to act, Alara, is worse than risking failure, because it leaves you with regret. With the knowledge that you could have done something, anything, but you didn't. Don't let fear control you, please." Alara looked into Greg's eyes, seeing the pain and the dedication within. She nodded slowly, wiping away her tears. Okay, I'll try." She closed her eyes, focusing her mind, channeling her fear and guilt into a single, powerful point. Greg picked up the laser, adjusting the settings with deft fingers. "Ready? On my mark, 3, 2, 1, now." He fired the pulsed laser beam, precisely timed with Alara's focused sonic burst. The combined attack slammed into the Krill unit's shields, creating a visible ripple. The shields flickered, weakened but not broken. But with each successive pulse, the Krill's shields adapted, becoming stronger, more resistant to the combined sonic and light assault. They needed something more, something drastic. A garbled transmission crackled through Greg's comlink. It was Daphne, her voice weak and distorted. "Krill, targeting, sound." The signal faded in and out, barely intelligible. "Primary weapon, designed, counteract, sonic." Greg's mind raced. The sonic emitter. They had salvaged a damaged Krill sonic emitter during the initial evacuation. Its primary function was to map the area, but it was powerful. "The sonic emitter, we can overload it, damage its targeting system." He glanced at the backup generator, its power output far exceeding the emitter's design specifications. It was a suicide move, but it might be their only chance. "Alara, I need you to focus all your power, all of it. I'm going to overload the sonic emitter, but I need you to create a concentrated beam, right at its targeting array." Alara nodded, her face grim. She knew the risks, but she also knew they had no other choice. She closed her eyes, summoning every ounce of her power, focusing it into a single, invisible lance of sonic energy. Greg raced to the backup generator, rerouting the power flow to the sonic emitter. Warning lights flashed, and alarms blared as the system strained against the overload. He flipped the final switch. The sonic emitter screamed, a high-pitched whine that resonated deep within their bones. Alara unleashed her focused sonic beam, directing it towards the Krill unit's targeting array. The two sonic forces collided, creating a feedback loop that shattered the Krill unit's shielding in a blinding flash of light and a deafening roar. The Krill Heavy Assault Unit, crippled but not destroyed, staggered backward, its targeting system mangled. In a final, desperate act of defiance, it unleashed a volley of missiles, targeting their position. The missiles streaked through the air, impacting with earth-shattering force, destroying the sonic emitter in a cascade of sparks and twisted metal. The explosions ripped through the remaining antidote gas tanks, shattering the containment vessels and dispersing the bioweapon into the air. The air shimmered, a greasy rainbow that burned the lungs and blurred the vision. The bioweapon gas, insidious and swift, spread through the evacuation zone like a toxic tide. Greg stumbled, his breath catching in ragged gasps. Disorientation slammed into him, each step a staggering battle against the encroaching weakness. He tasted metal, felt his muscles twitching uncontrollably. Daphne, her face a mask of fierce purpose, lurched forward. Pain etched itself into her features, a grim testament to the strain on her injured side, but her focus remained absolute. She cradled Ilara, angling her prosthetic limb to shield the infant from the worst of the gas, the metal groaning under the corrosive assault. Krill must be immune, Greg rasped, his voice a bare whisper. Or antidote. The thought sparked, a desperate gamble in the face of overwhelming odds. Capture, one alive. His mind raced, fighting through the fog of the gas. He scanned the wreckage, his gaze locking onto a crumpled sheet of plasteel. Ilara, need mask. He ripped at the metal, his fingers clumsy and unresponsive. Using his belt, he fashioned a crude filter, layering fabric scavenged from a discarded medkit. It was pathetic, barely functional, but it was all he had. He pressed it to Ilara's face, his touch gentle despite his trembling hands. Distraction, Daphne stated, her voice strained but resolute. I draw them away. You get one. Before Greg could protest, she was gone, a limping shadow disappearing into the swirling green haze. He heard the staccato bursts of her weapon, the enraged clicks of Krill in response. His gut twisted with a knot of fear. He tightened his grip on Ilara, pulling her close. Stay quiet. They moved like ghosts, hugging the shadows, their senses straining against the oppressive fog. The Krill were close, their chitinous bodies scraping against the debris, their multifaceted eyes glinting in the dim light. Greg relied on his instincts, honed by years of combat, to anticipate their movements. Ilara trembled in his arms, her eyes wide with fear. He could feel her hesitation, the reluctance to unleash her power. Remember what I said, he whispered, his voice hoarse. Take the risk, save lives. He felt her take a deep breath, a tiny tremor running through her small frame. Then a focused beam of sonic energy erupted from her, a silent scream that ripped through the Krill ranks. Several soldiers collapsed, their bodies convulsing, their weapons clattering to the ground. Greg seized the opportunity. He lunged forward, his movements clumsy but driven by adrenaline. He grabbed a Krill soldier, wrestling it to the ground. It hissed and clawed, its mandibles snapping, but Greg held on, his superior strength overwhelming its struggles. He dragged the captured Krill back to a relatively secure location, a ruined transport vehicle offering a modicum of protection from the gas. He secured it, his mind already working, dissecting the alien physiology in his head. Hours blurred into a frantic race against time. Using his medical knowledge and the limited tools at his disposal, Greg began the painstaking process of extracting fluids from the Krill. He isolated compounds, ran crude analyses, his hope dwindling with each failed attempt. Finally, he managed to synthesize a rudimentary antidote, a murky green liquid that filled a single syringe. But it wasn't enough. The effects were minimal, barely scratching the surface of the gas's potency. Andromedan biology, Daphne said, appearing suddenly out of the haze, her face bruised and bleeding. Gas, derived from homeworld resource. She explained, her voice weak but clear, how Ilara's powers could be used to amplify the antidote, to resonate with its unique properties. Greg looked at Ilara, his heart pounding. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was their only chance. Guided by Daphne's instructions, Alara focused her sonic energy not as a weapon but as a catalyst. She channeled her power into the antidote, her small body vibrating with the effort. The green liquid began to glow, pulsing with an ethereal light. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The amplified antidote dispersed through the evacuation zone, neutralized the bioweapon gas with astonishing speed. Evacuees coughed and sputtered, their strength returning, their vision clearing. The Krill forces, weakened and disoriented, stumbled and fell. With the gas neutralized, a wave of renewed energy surged through the evacuation zone. Greg, Daphne, and Alara led a final, desperate counter-offensive, pushing back the remaining Krill forces, securing the perimeter. The evacuation was completed. The last transport ship lifted off, carrying the remaining Andromedan refugees to safety. The Andromedan infant was reunited with its parents. Years later, on a new world, a planet teeming with refugees from 1,000 different species, Greg worked tirelessly in a bustling med bay. Daphne stood beside him, her prosthetic limb a gleaming testament to her resilience, translating for a newly arrived Volcromite family. A young child, no older than Alara had been, whimpered, clutching a torn toy. Alara, now a young woman, approached, her eyes filled with empathy. She knelt down, her hand outstretched. "It's okay," she said, her voice soft and soothing.